So welcome everybody, welcome again to our meeting today with Willie Snyman from South Africa, from Pretoria, one of our coaches in our program who is presenting the book that you have read, Willie, for his certification program. The book is A Whole New Mind, so we are here very interested to hear what you have to present in connection and in relation to the ICF coaching competencies. And we would love to have the follow-up and the conversation that we usually have to share your work and give our feedback and our thoughts on that.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, I'm looking forward to this book share, I would say, because it makes you think. You know, if you just read a book, it's fine that you get new insight. But if you read the book with the purpose of linking it to ICF competencies, it sort of forces you in a way to look closer. So I think to have this more purposeful for you, it will be very great if you can have your ICF competencies markers with you. So whilst I go through the book to see if you can relate very quickly to certain of these markers or the competencies in terms of, you know, establishing, maintaining the agreement, cultivate trust and safety, maintain presence, listen actively, and very important, evokes awareness. And then, of course, lastly, facilitate client growth. So, but also in the specifics of markers. So keep that in mind whilst I go through the book. Now, interesting in terms of this book, you know, Pink, the author, Daniel Pink, he outlined 6 fundamentally, as he called it, human abilities that are absolutely essential for professional success and personal fulfillment. So he's putting that very strongly. And coming back to us as coaches, so the book's name is A Whole New Mind, but I think put your hat on as a whole new mind for you as a coach. So you can say that, what is your mindset as a coach? You know, when you sit with a client, you have to know, I mean, that's just a fact that it's a different person. That person is not us. That person is different from us. That person doesn't feel like us, does not see the world like us, has different solutions to all the various problems. So I think the insights of the book can help you to you know, in the way you approach the client, to uncover I would say the client from a non-judgmental approach. So to start with, think of the brain. There's a nice picture of the brain, and in the metaphoric language of typical left brain and right brain metaphor, the right brain hemisphere is specialized for synthesis, in Afrikaans synthesis. It is particularly very good for putting, you know, isolated elements together to perceive things as a whole. So analysis and synthesis are perhaps the 2 most fundamental ways of interpreting information. You can break the whole into its components, or you can weave the components into a whole, because we know we have a whole brain. So because both are essential to human reasoning, but guided by different parts of the brain. As I said earlier, the left handles logic, sequence, literalness, and analysis. The right take care of synthesis, emotional expression, context, and so on. So he said that maybe it's better to talk not necessarily left brain, right brain, but left-directed thinking or right-directed thinking. Some of the science, you know, was put together by fMRI scans, that stands for functional magnetic resonance. So it's where they sort of showed pictures to some clients, and it captures pictures of the brain in action. So that's where we got the science from. I mean, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. And this is interesting also to having our Indian colleagues here on as well. In typical Western languages, reading and writing involves turning from left to right. And this written language was invented by the Greeks about 550 before Christ, and has helped reinforce left hemisphere dominance. Now, isn't that interesting? So, whereas in other parts of the world, it's more like reading from right to left. So if you think of Western focus is more linear, and Eastern is more, you know, right brain focus. You can even think of religion. I mean, basically, you know, if you think from a Western perspective, it's more like God is above. It's like above down to us. Whereas in more Eastern philosophy, religion is more God is inside you. You know, it's from the inner. So maybe we need both. It's not just the one or the other. So that is, in terms of that detail, just as a background. The left analyze the details, and the right synthesize the bigger picture. Now, from a coaching perspective, coaches need to take the note of the differences in terms of thinking preferences, for example. Some people prefer to think first logical, then moving towards more holistic thinking. So as a coach, to be aware also of your own preference of thought. So it is as if to say, talk the language of the client. So if the client is more like, if you can find that out as you will listen inquisitively to the client. If your client is more tended to think holistic and in pictures and what's the bigger picture, it might be a good thing to ask your questions in that way, because that is where you evoke awareness easier if you talk the language of the client. If the client is, for example, very linear, very logical thinking, it might be a good idea to ask your questions in a, I would say, in a more sequence, logical type of questioning, taking your own preference into account. So, for example, if I can just go to an example, for example, if you look at competency 3, establishing the agreement, the following questions, for example, can be asked. What would you like to focus on for our next conversation? You know, that is a typical left brain preference question. Or what would you like to take away from our conversation? That's more a right brain type of question. With a question like, how will you know if you have achieved your goal? A left brain preference answer could be different from a right brain preference answer. So it's analytical versus big picture. You can also look at, for example, competency 5.1. If I could have a look there. Coach acts in response to both the whole person for the client, the who, but that also means the whole brain, not just the left or the right brain. So that is just a bit of background for the brain. In my next picture, it's then what I say, a whole new mind. So now we actually start digging in to the real stuff. So, you know, if you think of us as human beings, we tend to think in paradoxes, you know, left, right. We tend to think in terms of Mars versus Venus, or East versus West, logic versus emotion, yin versus yang. It's just how we are. But we need to understand that we need both, you know, because logic without emotion is, as he put in his book, like chilly Spock-like. Emotion without logic is weepy and hysterical, isn't it? The two sides, and that's the point, the two sides work in concert together. An orchestra will sound awful if one side packs up its instruments and go home. Designed to work together as a single integrated whole in one complete brain. It's still a powerful metaphor. I mean, we can still say that people with logical, sequential, computer-like reasoning versus people with holistic, intuitive, and non-linear reasoning. We need both. So that is what he said then. Left-directed thinking, focus from the information age where we came from, and now we move towards the future that is more right-directed thinking for this conceptual age that we are in. Coming back to coaching. So, when partnering with a client, it means partnering with the whole person, the whole mind, the whole brain, with logic and emotion. It is directly, I mean, very straight, if you can go to competency number 7, very directly related, especially to competency 7 and 8, where we create awareness, listen actively and ask powerful questions. If I can give you a couple of examples. What will change if you achieve your goal? What is in your control? If you could start over, what would you do differently? What is the cost for not taking action? Imagine you had no barriers. What would that be like? What specific events led you to that conclusion? You see, here's the point. Depending on how the client answers, the coach can ask a follow-up question with whole brain thinking intention. I think that's the point. So I just want to outline a couple of academic stuff here in his book. He said the 6 so-called human abilities that we now need going forward. I'm going to name them, and then of course I will elaborate them with specific examples. He talks about design, story, symphony, empathy, play, and meaning. That is the 6 things, but I'll elaborate a bit. With design, he means in an age of material abundance, we've got everything. Design has become crucial for most modern businesses. I mean, even if you, for example, if you buy a coffee machine and only use the coffee machine for now and then, I mean, it must still look nice in your area. It's not just the functional aspect, it's also the design. Story. He means by that, to be successful today, presenting facts is not enough. You must know how to tell stories. People don't like to read anymore a lot, you know, and you have to capture their mind by storytelling. The third thing, symphony, he means by symphony, putting the pieces together is more important than taking them apart. And I'll elaborate with that in a moment. Number 4, empathy. As computers take more and more tasks, abilities unique to people, such as empathizing with others, become more important. Play. Light-heartedness will likely play an ever more important and beneficial role both at work and outside work. 6, meaning. Now that our material needs are met, we search for meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in life. That is also what the latest research from University of Stanford showed us, is people tend to be more a little bit lost, and loss of meaning and purpose, and loneliness and negative self-talk. And the answer for the future is exactly to change that, to get into a more meaningful and purposeful life with better connection. So now if we take these 6 fundamental human abilities, as he called them, and make it applicable to coaching, it's actually nice how one can weave it in your practice. So the first one, then he's saying design. So now you need to put up your coaching hat and think of the concept of design. Good design offers us a chance to bring pleasure, meaning, and beauty to our lives. It is no longer sufficient to create a product, service, or an experience of a lifestyle that's just functional. It's not, you need more than that. Today, it's crucial and rewarding to create something that is also beautifully and emotionally engaging. So now if you think of yourself, the coach, design can also relate how you package your coaching practice. I mean, if a client comes to you and he leaves with maybe, or in the session, there's visuals that you can show him. There's you know, a very nice way how you show the client the outline of your coaching. It could mean an app on your phone, on the client's phone, that you can also give him. It might mean a colorful brochure. It might mean that afterwards you send him a very nice summary of the discussion, but just no normal email, but also with colorful, etc., depending on the client's brain profile. So you have to think also clearly, how can you design your coaching practice to make it better than ever? So you'll be the first coach the person will come to back and remember you. But also, if you can think of the competencies now, competency 7, evoking awareness. It's all about patterns of behavior. So if you listen carefully to the client, what are the patterns of behavior? What are the patterns of thinking? What are the way the client showing up to you, and how you can then design questions so to evoke more awareness. And it's all there, I mean, in the markers anyway. I mean, 7.1, coach asks questions about the client, such as their current thinking, feeling, values, needs, wants, beliefs, and behaviors. So a lot of the design concept is there, not just the design of your coaching practice, but also how you design questions in such a way to make sure that you invoke the awareness from the client, not only in the typical questions that's showed there in the ICF competencies. A couple of questions one can ask, for example, in terms of establishing the agreement, is what do you hope to take away from our session today? What would it like to be for you if you achieve this? Why is this important to you? What would you see as ways to get there? What would you like to address? That's standard questions, but maybe one can develop more interesting questions than just a standard question, what do you want to achieve? And of course, competition number 6 is to listen very actively, because if you don't really listen actively, it will be not so easy to ask from an inquisitive point of view the right questions. If you can, for example, look at 6.1, 6.5, and 6.7, it's just ways how you can, when you listen actively, for example, 6.1, coach questions and observations are customized by using what the coach has learned about who the client is or the client situation. 6.5, coach inquires about or explores how the client currently perceives himself or their world. So if you design your questions very carefully and correctly, you will just know more about the client. I mean, it is what you are aware of, how the client designs his life. I think that's the point. It's how you have to find out how the client is designing his life, and how can you design good questions to evoke that awareness. Otherwise, it's like for the client, life by design or life by default. He's just living and he's there. But life by design is maybe the route to go for the client. The second one that then Pink said is the whole thing about stories, because stories are easier to remember. Storytelling doesn't replace analytical thinking. It supplements it by enabling us to imagine new perspectives and new worlds. And then immediately you can hear the constructs from listen actively, and definitely the creating awareness and facilitate client growth from competency 8. It is not enough, that's his point, it's not enough to marshal an effective argument. Someone somewhere will track down a counterpoint to rebut your point. The essence of persuasion, communication, and self-understanding has become the ability also to fashion a compelling narrative. So in terms of competency 7, the coach can evoke further awareness by asking For example, the following type of questions. What is great about your life this week? In 3 years from now, tell me about your amazing life. What is the best thing about your life right now? Take note, of course, for all of us, it's the client's story. But maybe the client can develop a new story, a more empowering story. And that will bring us then to competency 8, where you evoke more client growth. I think that will make sense there. It's not your story, it's the client's story. So if he can develop the narrative in his head, more empowering narrative than the old narrative that he had before the coaching. Then very interesting also, what I actually like is his concept of symphony. Now, symphony is the ability to put together the pieces. It is the capacity to synthesize rather than to analyze, to see relationships between seemingly unrelated fields, to detect broad patterns rather than to deliver specific answers. And from the way that he explained it, symphony is largely about relationships. So if that's true, you can immediately think as a coach, the relationship that you have with yourself first. The more you understand yourself better, the easier it is maybe to understand the client better. So it's like an inner-out approach. So have the symphony in your own life first, then it's easier to hear the symphony of the client. So it has then also to do with a bigger picture. So by listening actively, that is competency number 6, by listening actively to the music of the client, to that symphony, the coach can create further awareness by asking maybe the following types of questions. Can you paint me a picture of your big dream? Can you see patterns of your behaviors repeating? Is there another way to look at it? Can you draw a picture of your feelings? Is your life a treadmill or a journey? What is your big picture? A lot to do with competency 7, because now the client needs to think and you have to listen carefully. I'm nearly to the end. The last 2 is empathy. Empathy, of course, you know what empathy is, the ability to imagine yourself in someone else's position. It is the ability to stand in another person's shoes, to see with their eyes and to feel with their hearts. So the capacity for logical thought is one of the things that makes us human. But in a world of all these variants and up and down information, ambiguous information, and advanced analytical tools, core logic alone can't do it. So if you think of competency number 4, for example, cultivate trust and safety. I mean, that's definitely where empathy lies. The coach will cultivate trust and safety by showing support, empathy, or concerns. For example, by the following types of questions. How does this make you feel? Will this bring you joy? How will that serve you? How did you get here? And also the way you ask the question in an empathic way. And I think also from a coach perspective, empathy for yourself as a coach, to realize again that trust yourself, things will unfold the way it should, because the client has the answers. You just need to trust yourself as a coach that it will happen in the way that you perceive it if you connect to the client in an empathic way. If I look at play, the coach can evoke further awareness by that. That is a lot to do with competency number 7. First, and facilitate client growth by asking the following questions. For example, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? Imagine if I could create miracles, what miracle would you want me to create today? What's stopping you from playing full out? How can you make this more fun? And I think the way we deal with our clients is see how can you design your whole session that it can be more light-hearted, I would say, more with play, and in that hopefully evoke the awareness with your client that he should celebrate life more, and everything is with that also small steps. Lastly, the whole thing about meaning and purpose, which is so important. Meaning is about purpose, values, identity. You have to listen to the chats of the client. You have to capture the verbs. You have to listen very carefully, because you want the client to connect to the client's meaning and purpose. And he will get there with you as the coach, asking the right questions so that they can link to that. We live in a world of breathtaking material plenty that has freed hundreds of millions of people from day-to-day struggles. But we need to pursue more significant desires. That is purpose, transcendence, and spiritual fulfillment. Typical questions you can ask also, and that is definitely also, mentioned, from competency 8.2, if you have a look at that. What kind of breakthrough would you like to have today? What does playing full out mean to you? What does your heart long for? When do you feel satisfied and fulfilled? Definitely part of all those competencies. So that is basically the presentation. It meant a lot for me personally. It let you think about yourself, as a coach. It let you think, what is meaningful and purpose for you as a coach. What is your brain profile and preferences of thinking? What is the way that you play out your life? How do you design your practice, and how do you design your questions? How do you sort of empathize, and how do you show empathy, and how do you experience something in your own life? So the more you are aware of what's happening here with you, it's just easier then to be inquisitive, how the client is different from you, and how can you ask the right questions so that you can be inquisitive with an inquisitive mind. Evoke awareness of the client so that the client sees his meaning and purpose and his direction, not your own direction. Thank you, Christina. That was 37 minutes.
Thank you, Willie. We are just grateful that you shared your experience, your reading, your material, your wisdom, your perspective. It's always a wonderful occasion when we read books for our preparation to become a coach or to be a better coach. It's always great to share different perspectives. So that's why we do what we do here. And that's why we also record it to make it available for other coaches, others who just want to listen to someone who read a book and who has something to share. And we noticed, we are aware that we might read the same book, but we can bring different perspective, different things. We can highlight and focus on different things. So that's why it's always so interesting what we do together. And thank you for your work today. We're going to close the recording now because we can start our sharing and our conversation with the rest of the community. So thank you again, Willie.
This is our Sunlight Academy. If you want to become a certified life coach and find out more about our accredited coaching education, be part of our global community and learn about our programs, you can visit our website, sunlight.academy, and get in touch with us. We are more than happy to meet you.